Learn English through stories B14. Adapted and modified by Kulwant Singh Sandhu. Contents: 1. You can't please everyone. 2. Paddington the Bear. 3. Picture dictionary page. 1. You can't please everyone. A man, his wife, and their 3 children lived in a small village. The man loved his wife dearly. Her 40th birthday was coming soon. He wanted to buy her a good present. He consulted his sister. The sister advised him to buy a suit for her. And she said that he should buy a suit of his wife's favorite color, black. One day his children were on holiday. He decided to go to the town to buy a suit for his wife. His younger son Mintu wanted to go as well. He was very fond of reading, so he wanted to buy a story book. They left early for the town. They took their donkey with them. On reaching the town, they went to a sweet shop. The father had a cup of tea and a samosa. Mintu had an ice cream. Then they went to a bookstore. Mintu looked at some book. He chose a book of Akbar and Birbal stories. Then they went to a clothes shop. They looked at many suits. Some of them were very expensive. Some of them were quite cheap. They chose a middle-range suit. It was black with small yellow and blue flowers. Then they went to a small dhaba. They ate chole masala puri. It was extremely hot. Mintu drank 3 glasses of water. Mintu's dad Bagu did not find it hot at all. He ate 3 long green chilies with his food. Bagu paid the bill and they left for the village. On the way back they met a couple, Shaja and Charno. Charno said to Bagu, "Where have you been?" Bagu replied, "We went to the town to buy a few things." Then Shaja said, "Banu, what is the point of having a donkey and your son walking, a poor little child?" Mintu liked that and said, "Thank you, Uncle Shaja." Now the son rode the donkey and the father walked. Soon they met another couple. "How shameful of you," cried the woman, "let your father ride, won't he be tired?" So the boy got down and the father rode the donkey. Again they marched on. "Poor boy," said the next person they met, "why should the lazy father ride while his son is walking?" So the boy got onto the donkey too. As they went on, they met some travelers. One of the travelers said, "I cannot believe it, how cruel people are nowadays. 2 healthy people are riding on a poor donkey." Hearing this, the father and the son got down. Now they decided to carry the donkey on their shoulders. As they did so, the travelers broke into laughter. The laughter frightened the donkey. It broke free and ran away. Now the father and son were walking home without the donkey. The father said to his son, "Mintu, you cannot please everyone." When they arrived home, they saw the donkey was already there. The donkey was happily munching his grass. A week later, they celebrated the birthday of Bagu's wife. After cutting the cake, Bagu gave his wife her present. She went into her bedroom and put it on. She was super happy. She danced on a Punjabi song. "How beautiful is Patiala. Get stitched a black suit for me with very small flowers. It suits me really well. Last night I wrote your name on the parapet." Bagu thought to himself, "You cannot please everyone, you can please someone." A thought of a donkey. If I did have a neck as long as a giraffe's, I would have teased all other creatures as puny little dwarfs. If I did have wings and feathers as beautiful as a peacock's, I would show them proudly to all, and with pride and pleasure walk. If I did have strength, as great as an elephant's, I would have bullied all animals, and made them my servants. If I did have intelligence, as sharp as that of a man, I don't know what I should do with it. Oh, God, I would have surely gone mad. 2. Paddington the Bear. Mr. and Mrs. Brown first met Paddington on a railway platform. In fact, that was how he came to have such an unusual name for a bear, because Paddington was the name of the station. The Browns were waiting to meet their daughter, Judy, when Mr. Brown noticed something small and furry near the left luggage office. "It looks like a bear," he said. "A bear?" repeated Mrs. Brown. "On Paddington Station? Don't be silly, Henry. There can't be." But Mr. Brown was right. It was sitting on an old leather suitcase marked "Wanted on Voyage, Hand Luggage," and as they drew near it stood up and politely raised his hat. "Good afternoon," it said. "May I help you?" "It's very kind of you," said Mr. Brown, "but as a matter of fact, we were wondering if we could help you." "You're a very small bear," said Mrs. Brown. "Where are you from?" The bear looked around carefully before replying. "Darkest Peru. I'm not really supposed to be here at all. I'm a stowaway." "You don't mean to say you've come all the way from South America on your own?" exclaimed Mrs. Brown. "Whatever did you do for food?" Unlocking the suitcase, the bear took out an almost empty glass jar. "I ate marmalade," it said. "Bears like marmalade." Mrs. Brown looked at the label around the bear's neck. It said, quite simply, "Please look after this bear. Thank you." "Oh, Henry," she cried. "We can't leave him here all by himself. There's no knowing what might happen to him. Can't he come home and stay with us?" "Stay with us," repeated Mr. Brown nervously. He looked down at the bear. Would you like that?" he asked. "That is," he added hastily, "if you have nothing else planned." "Oh, yes," replied the bear. "I would like that very much. I've nowhere to go and everyone seems in such a hurry." "That settles it," said Mrs. Brown. "Now you must be thirsty after your journey. Mr. Brown can get you some tea while I go and meet our daughter, Judy." "But Mary," said Mr. Brown. "We don't even know his name." Mrs. Brown thought for a moment. "I know," she said. "We'll call him Paddington after the station." Paddington. The bear tested it several times to make sure. "It sounds very important." Mr. Brown tried out next. "Follow me, Paddington," he said. "I'll take you to the snack bar." Mr. Brown was as good as his word. Paddington had never seen so many snacks on one tray, and he didn't know which to try first. He was so hungry and thirsty he climbed up on the table to get a better look. Mr. Brown turned away, pretending he had tea with the bear on Paddington Station every day of his life. "Henry," cried Mrs. Brown when she arrived with Judy. "What are you doing to that poor bear?" Paddington jumped up to raise his hat, and in his haste, he trod on a strawberry tart, skidded on the cream and fell over backwards into his cup of tea. "I think we'd better go before anything else happens," said Mr. Brown. Judy took hold of Paddington's paw. "Come along," she said. "We'll take you home and you can meet Mrs. Bird and my brother, Jonathan." Mr. Brown led the way to a waiting taxi. "Number 32 Windsor Gardens, please," he said. The driver stared at Paddington. "Bear is extra," he growled. "Sticky Bears is twice as much, and make sure none of it comes off on my interior. It was clean when I set out this morning." The sun was shining as they drove out of the station, and there were cars and big red buses everywhere. Paddington waved to some people waiting at a bus stop, and several of them waved back. It was all very friendly. Paddington tapped the taxi driver on his shoulder. "It isn't a bit like darkest Peru," he announced. The man jumped at the sound of Paddington's voice. "Cream," he said bitterly. "Cream and jam all over my coat." He slid the little window behind him shut. "Oh dear," Henry murmured Mrs. Brown. "I wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Fortunately, before anyone had time to answer, they arrived at Windsor Gardens and Judy helped Paddington onto the pavement. "Now you're going to meet Mrs. Bird," she said. "She looks after us. She's a bit fierce at times, but she doesn't really mean it. I'm sure you'll like her." Paddington felt his knees begin to wobble. "I'm sure I shall, if you say so," he replied. "The thing is, will she like me?" "Goodness gracious," exclaimed Mrs. Bird. "What have you got there?" "It's not a what," said Judy. "It's a bear called Paddington, and he's coming to stay with us." "A bear," said Mrs. Bird, as Paddington raised his hat. "Well, he has good manners, I'll say that for him." "I'm afraid I stepped on a jam tart by mistake," said Paddington. "I can see that," said Mrs. Bird. "You'd better have a bath before you're very much older. Judy can turn it on for you. I dare say you'll be wanting some marmalade too." "I think she likes you," whispered Judy. Paddington had never been in a bathroom before, and while the bathroom was running he made himself at home. First of all, he tried writing his new name in the steam on the mirror. Then he used Mr. Brown's shaving foam to draw a map of Peru on the floor. It wasn't until a drip landed on his head that he remembered what he was supposed to be doing. He soon discovered that getting into a bath is the one thing, but it's quite another matter getting out again, especially when it's full of soapy water. Paddington tried calling out, "Help!" At first in a quiet voice so as not to disturb anyone, then very loudly. When that didn't work, he began bailing the water out with his hat. But the hat had several holes in it, and his map of Peru soon turned into a sea of foam. Suddenly Jonathan and Judy burst into the bathroom and lifted a dripping Paddington onto the floor. "Thank goodness you're all right," cried Judy. "We heard you calling out, fancy making such a mess," said Jonathan admiringly. "You should have pulled the plug out," said Paddington. "I never thought of that." When Paddington came downstairs, he looked so clean no one could possibly be cross with him. His fur was all soft and silky, his nose gleamed, and his paws had lost all traces of the jam and cream. The Browns made room for him in a small armchair, and Mrs. Bird brought him a pot of tea and a plate of hot buttered toast and marmalade. "Now," said Brown, "you must tell us all about yourself. I'm sure you must have had lots of adventures," "I have," said Paddington earnestly. "Things are always happening to me. I'm that sort of a bear." He settled back in the armchair. "I was brought up by my Aunt Lucy in darkest Peru," he began. "But she had to go into a home for retired bears in Lima." He closed his eyes thoughtfully and a hush fell over the room as everyone waited expectantly. After a while, when nothing happened, they began to get restless. Mr. Brown tried coughing. Then he reached across and pocked Paddington. "Well, I never," he said. "I do believe he's fast asleep after all that's happened to him," said Mrs. Brown. "Is it any wonder?" A Polar Bear Poem. I am a polar bear. I live north of everywhere. I live at the top of the world. The furry white coat I wear in the snow keeps me warm when it's 20 below. I am a polar bear. I live north of everywhere. I live at the top of the world. Fishing in the ice and swimming in the sea makes living in the North Pole perfect for me. I am a polar bear. 3. Picture dictionary page.